This Week in Virology, the podcast about viruses, the kind that make you sick. From Microbe TV, this is TWIV, This Week in Virology, episode 689, recorded on December 3rd, 2020. I'm Vincent Racaniello, and you're listening to the podcast all about viruses. Joining me today from New York, Daniel Griffin.
Hello, everyone. Vincent, do I say hello, everyone, or hello, everybody? I think I alternate, right?
I don't think it matters. Whatever you feel like on a given night. Yeah.
All right. So let me start. I was emailing with my buddy Peter Hotez earlier today, and he was on the recent, Stick to the Vax. I think that was a pun on Stick to the Vax, maybe.
Peter Hotez.
So I decided I'm gonna put a disclaimer right up front.
Uh-huh.
So this is similar to what you might hear when you get on an airplane and they say, this flight is headed to San Francisco. So if that is not your final destination, you might want to get off now.
Right.
And, Vincent, it may seem a while ago, but, when we started these, it was actually, I'd come to Vincent. Our listeners may not know this backstory, but we were trying to keep all the physicians here in the New York tri-state area updated on, what we were learning, what was happening. And Vincent very generously sort of offered this forum as a chance for us to sort of once a week share that knowledge. So these updates started back in March. And it was all about, what we were learning about COVID, the therapeutics, what we were seeing firsthand as practicing clinicians. So, it's really what we're here to share is the truth of what we're seeing. There's no real agenda here. We're not trying to grow any audience. At some point, maybe Vincent will kick me off if, no one wants to listen to me anymore. But this has been, I think, a tremendous service. So I want to thank Vincent for that. But I will say there's no warm soup here. I'm not here to make these difficult times easier. I'm just here to basically share what's going on, what we're learning, the cold, hard truth. Oddly enough, I think some anti-vaxxers, I've been told the word trolls is applicable here at times. But, for the next 30 minutes, we're not going to talk about anti-vax theories. So if you've tuned in accidentally to the wrong podcast, this might be time to jump off. The next 30 minutes, you're never going to get them back. So, spend them well. Okay. Now that I've made my disclaimer, my quotation. One ought never to turn one's back on a threatened danger, but to try to run away from it. If you do that, you will double the danger. But if you meet it promptly and without flinching, you will reduce the danger by half. And can people guess who that's? That's Winston again. I like Winston Churchill. Now, these are dark times already. People keep saying, oh, we've got a dark winter ahead of us. But, there are over 100,000 Americans in the hospital right now with COVID-19. And, yesterday, the numbers were almost 3,000. Today, we have over 3,000 people who died here in the U.S. of COVID-19. We've reached capacity at the hospitals here in New York. I got an alert from one of the hospitals yesterday. We have, numbers of people stuck here in the ER because there's no open beds. The ICUs are overflowing into the other areas. This is not a great sign. I mean, we are not even seeing the post-Thanksgiving surge. So just want people to sort of think about when they're making their decisions, we are as bad right now as it has ever gotten. More people died today than have ever died in a single day from COVID-19 here in the States. More people are in the hospital right now with COVID-19 than ever. So really think about that. All right, let's move through our phases, our pre-exposure period. Little update here for our clinicians. I got a lot of questions about this. New York has now recommended broader use of eye protection. And I know we've talked a little bit about the science behind this. It takes a little while for the recommendations to catch up with the science, but New York State Department of Health now strongly recommends universal use of eye protection by healthcare personnel for all patient interactions. And this is in addition to the face masks. And I got an email sort of asking about this, and it was entertaining. So it was a whole loop. It was a number of clinicians in a clinic, and one of them emailed me saying, we only do well visits. We don't let people come in if they're sick. And I'm not sure if this really applies to me. And so I responded back and said, you think they're well visits. But, what percent of those people are pre-symptomatic, are asymptomatic? And that's really the thing. If you get a call the next day and they say, you know what, I wasn't feeling 100% when I saw you, and today I just got a test, and you were not wearing your eye protection, that's a potential exposure. So, this is really moving into a universal precautions approach, at least for the foreseeable future here. For front-facing healthcare workers, we'll talk about why there is a finite period of time that we're going to need to be practicing this really high level of caution. But universal recommendation here in New York when clinicians are interacting, and I extend this to all staff, when you're within that 6 feet, when you're going to potentially be at risk, protect your mouth, protect your nose, and protect your eyes. People are still taking zinc, vitamin D, vitamin C. This all seems fine. And there was a nice article in Nature, analysis of vitamin D levels among asymptomatic and critically ill COVID-19 patients and its correlation with inflammatory markers. But, I'm going to sort of push out here again and say we really need to do some randomized controlled trials. I mean, we currently in the US spend over $1 billion a year, over $1 billion a year on vitamin D supplements and testing. That's a lot of money. It would be nice to know, is that well spent money? If it's not, then you could give a little bit of that to, Vincent in the lab. So, or support Microbe TV. But no, it's important. We do a lot of studies looking at, small molecule inhibitors, pharmaceutical agents. Vitamin D is something a lot of people take for a lot of different reasons. It would make sense to really understand its role in COVID-19. I also want to talk about testing here, right? This is hopefully the pre-exposure period. Hopefully you haven't been exposed yet. And we really ramped up testing over the last couple of weeks here. I was doing one of those, I call them the microphone bouquet interviews this morning. You've got a whole bunch of microphones and, you're not sure who you're talking to, but you look at the sea of cameras. And we were talking about what we've done with rapid testing. In the last few weeks, and I was there with Bonnie Simmons. She's the head of our Tri-State Urgent Cares. She's my buddy Adam Fitterstein's boss. And she just, she always wonders, she's like, Dan, ever I call you, pick up the phone. I'm like, Bonnie, you're kind of a hero of mine. You really allowed us to make this happen, all this rapid testing. And what we saw right before Thanksgiving is a lot of people were going and getting tested. A lot of people with asymptomatic and pre-symptomatic infections were being picked up, diagnosed, sort of pulled out, contact tracing, and then those people were being picked out. And I really think, we were saving lives here. We were detecting people before they went to those gatherings. We were picking up who else was infected that they were interacting with. And so this is really taken on, and people are realizing the utility. 2 days before symptoms, 5 days of symptoms. The rapid test gives you a result in about 15 minutes. It's really been tremendous. This is free, right? This is something that we, as a society are picking up. This is not something we charge people for. And I was there this morning. It was quite cold. And there were 2 lines of cars, and just sort of going around the corner. And these were all people that were basically driving up, getting swabbed. They would then drive on. And by the time they got to work, school, home, they would be alerted by the results and basically told, if you just got to work, stay in your car, turn around, go home, or otherwise, all right, you're clear and can move forward. So, so much more helpful than, finding out in 4 or 5 days after you've exposed people that, oh, by the way, when you went to that Thanksgiving dinner, when you went to work, when you went to school, you were shedding by it. Really embracing this, and a lot of people are moving in this direction. Now, vaccines. All right. I'll call this better than vitamin D, right? If you have a choice, a good vaccine or vitamin D. I'm going with the vaccine. I might also, at some point, remember to take some of that vitamin D that's still sitting on the shelf in my medicine cabinet, only growing in value, I'm sure. So we got more information. And it's always amazing because I was like, wow, is this really only the last week? It always seems like old news, but we got more information on the Moderna vaccine, and Moderna has now applied for EUA for their vaccine. And some of this was covered in the previous TWIV, so listen for more in-depth there. But what do we as clinicians, I'm going to bullet point this. Moderna reported a vaccine efficacy of about 94.1%. And if you looked at the secondary endpoint, severe disease, 100%. No one who received the Moderna vaccine ended up requiring an ER visit, or hospital care. It also was reported that the vaccine was well tolerated. There were no serious safety concerns. And I'll sort of make the point here, the difference between reactogenicity and severe adverse effects. You get the vaccine, feel a little under the weather for a day or two. Shane Crotty has been tweeting out. I've been retweeting this. It's The Rock, Dwayne Reed, The Rock, and he goes to the gym and he's really sore the next day. That's kind of what it's like. That's the reactogenicity. That's your immune system learning. And then you move forward, but no serious safety concerns. And now we have about 70,000 people that have been vaccinated. We've got months of this. So we've exceeded 2 months of median follow-up post-vaccination as required by the US FDA for the EUA. So we'll be seeing that reviewed on the 17th. So that's the other bullet point. Thursday, December 17th, the Moderna vaccine is scheduled to be reviewed. What do we know so far? This primary analysis that we got as an update, 196 cases, of which 185 cases of COVID-19 were observed in the placebo group, only 11 cases in the vaccinated group. And then as mentioned, all the severe cases were in people that had not gotten vaccinated. Someone died, and that was another person who did not get vaccinated. So pretty impressive. So between Pfizer and Moderna, projections are that we should have enough vaccine for approximately 40 million doses by the end of this month. We expect to start vaccinating people this month. 70 million doses per month starting in January. A projection is we will have the ability to vaccinate 100 million Americans by the end of February. Pfizer Ultra Cold vaccine did just get approval in the UK, so people probably have heard about that. So I'm just going to hit a couple important dates for our clinicians to keep an eye on. One already passed, December 1st, the ACIP. This is the Advisory Committee on Vaccines. And this was a little bit different, right? Normally, this committee meets after a vaccine is licensed, and then they give advice on who should get it. So this is a little bit of a twist. They met and they said, so when a vaccine gets an EUA, we're going to give some preemptive recommendations on who should be prioritized. And my wife really liked this because, initially they had, we're going to have phase 1 and 2 and sort of down the line. So what they did is they created phase 1A, B, and C. This way a whole bunch of people are in phase 1. So I thought that was clever. And what they did basically is nothing that surprised anyone. They said, hey, we're going to do healthcare workers right up front. And then we're going to sort of move down the line. We'll be moving into educators and firefighters and police officers and people in food and sort of really like critical people. And then we're going to move into phase 1C, and that's the 65 and over. So I'm going to talk a little bit about when I think people will actually see the vaccine. So December 10th, that's a week from the time we're recording this. The FDA will review the Pfizer vaccine. December 17th, the FDA will review the Moderna vaccine. And just to talk a little bit about the numbers, front-facing healthcare workers, this is phase 1A, healthcare personnel. And this includes EMTs, EMS, and also that it's going to move right into the long-term care facility residents.
You too, right?
This is all, what's that?
Are you included in that?
In the long-term care facility resident or the
No, healthcare.
I am actually.
Very good. Very good.
Yeah, I'm actually, I think I was talking with people I work with and I may have seen more COVID patients or had more exposure to COVID patients than anyone else I know. So yeah, I have a lot of exposure. I go see people in the ER, see people in the ICU. I see people, out in the urgent care settings as well in the clinic. So yeah, if you can get exposed to COVID, I make it my business.
So Daniel, are you going to feel somewhat relieved that you have a vaccine?
Tremendously relieved, actually. And this, I'm going to answer that question I keep skirting, right? People keep saying, Dan, are you going to get the vaccine and when? And I heard Barack Obama, he's like going to get the vaccine as soon as it's ready. And I think that's the thing. A week from today, we're recording this on Thursday. So a week from today, the FDA is going to have the review of the Pfizer vaccine. All the information is going to be out. One of the people on our vaccine committee is going to be tasked with, listening to all the questions, reviewing all the data. So hopefully when we record next time, I'll have all the information to go ahead and say, yes, I feel like this is safe and we're ready to go. Or if something comes up, I'll let people know otherwise. But I anticipate a little more than a week after this drops, I'll be getting in line for my vaccine and planning on, I'll stream that live on YouTube or something.
Get someone to tape it on your iPhone, record it on your iPhone. We could splice it in here.
Okay. Yeah. Because I think that will help people. You want to see someone, I was talking to my mom earlier today. I answered to no one other than the truth. And she's like, yes, well aware of that. So, I'm going to get the vaccine if I feel like it's safe and effective. And I think that will sort of help get the message out there. If I don't think it's safe and effective, I'm going to wait until I feel confident. So hopefully that'll help our listeners. Phase 1A is going to start in December. We're all ramped up and ready to go. Then we move into phase 1B, and that's all the essential workers I mentioned. So education, food and agriculture, police, firefighters, correctional officers, transportation. That's going to start in January. And then phase 1C, that's 65 and over. That's sort of our high risk. That's going to be January moving into February. So this is really happening pretty quick. So this is good stuff. Once we move into March, that's when we're really moving into wider distribution. And children, people wonder about children. Hasn't been tested on children yet, but Pfizer has announced that they're going to be starting to test in the 12 to 18-year-old population. They're going to have 3,000 people in that initial venture, I should say. Moderna has also said they're going to be moving their vaccine into that population as well. So we're going to have important information on can we use this vaccine in younger individuals. 18 is kind of arbitrary, right? I'm not sure how immunology and the right to vote somehow got pegged at 18. I was worried when they raised the drinking age to 21 that, that would somehow, but no, really arbitrary there. So I did want to talk a little bit actually about this whole ultra cold thing with Pfizer, right? We always talk about vaccine hesitancy, and we're talking about, the patients being hesitant. But unfortunately, I think because of some issues with communication here, we've had vaccine hesitancy on the part of clinics, physicians, healthcare organizations saying, I just don't want to have to deal with Pfizer and this ultra cold, and I don't want to buy these deep freezers. Or the other side is you have all these people spending really a lot of money buying these freezers. So I'll talk a little bit about this. So I'm on this National Vaccine Initiative Committee. And actually Wednesday, so yesterday, I was in a meeting with basically our whole group and Pfizer's medical director. This is, I believe, Catherine Jansen is her name. Really bright woman. After the conversation, I talked to John Hitt, who's like our senior person. And he was actually saying, I guess when you have a lot of money, you can hire really good people. So I was impressed by that. But they've really figured this stuff out. It's pretty amazing. They've got these thermal shippers, which really are a little bit larger than, we'll say, like 5 personal pizza boxes. So it's really 5 personal pizza boxes. Each personal pizza box has about 200 vials, actually 195 vials, 5 doses per vial. And they're in this box surrounded by dry ice. We'll talk a little about dry ice. And basically send this out. So 5, you could say 195 times 5. So about 1,000 doses in this thermal shipper. And that thermal shipper itself is basically a deep freezer. You repack it with dry ice every few days. Everything is in there. You don't have to buy one of these deep freezers. It's small enough that it fits under a desk. They even send you these special thermal gloves. I asked about that on the call. I'm like, how am I going to touch those, negative 70 degree things? Because I remember, going into the deep freeze, and you pull it out and you get freezer burn on your fingers. So they send goggles, they send special gloves. You grab as many vials as you want, let them come up to room temperature, add some saline, invert it a few times. And then fill your syringes. So it's really, really user-friendly, really something that can get out there. And it's actually something not only that I think we're going to do here in the U.S., but there's already plans to use the same technology throughout sub-Saharan Africa, low, middle income countries as well. So really no issues here. Everyone should start getting signed up, registered, so they can make this happen. You get your first dose with Pfizer 3 weeks later, you get your second dose. And within 5 days, you are at these wonderful levels of protection that we've all heard about. Just want to sort of let people know that this whole cold storage, ultra cold stuff, it's really not an issue. Pfizer's worked this out. And so there'll be a little details adjusted at sort of the endpoint once the FDA comes and says, this is exactly the way we want you to do it. How many times can you recharge that thermal freezer with your, what kind of ice is that? Dry ice. And I promised I would mention dry ice. And I'm going to make a video this weekend on homemade dry, because everyone's like, oh my gosh, we're going to run out of dry ice. And it's really easy to make. And don't try this at home. People will listen and do that when I say that. But, you can really just take one of those CO2 fire extinguishers in a cloth bag and either tape it or have a really good glove, and you blast it into the bag, and presto, you have dry ice. So I'll be blasting that on Twitter this weekend. But yeah, we're not going to run out of dry ice. It's easy to make dry ice. We've got lots of CO2. We're good to go. Apparently there was a CO2 shortage in England a couple of years back, and they couldn't make beer or something. So nothing to worry about. All right, let's move into our incubation post-exposure period. That little changes here, right? The CDC updated its guidance. And they basically said, this makes sense. I've been talking about this for a little while, but now it's official. When we used to say you got exposed, now you got to quarantine for 14 days. My wife, her famous, that's excessive. So yeah, she's right. Nobody did that. So now what they've said is what you can do is at the end of 7 days, get a test. If the test is negative, then you can move forward. So that was just updated December 2nd. And this does not need to be a PCR. They don't specify that. You can go ahead and get your rapid test. 15 minutes later, you find out you're good to go. You move forward. So I would say that's really positive. All right, now we move into the viral symptom phase. Now, unfortunately, you have not missed the bullet. You've actually got infected. You're starting to have symptoms. Just some monoclonal antibody updates. People have not really forgotten about the monoclonal antibodies. There still tends to be a tremendous demand. And actually, when this episode drops on Saturday, there'll be some stuff in the news about Eli Lilly and my involvement with them. So tell people, watch the news, and we'll talk more about this next week. But I did want to add a little bit of a discussion. I was listening to TWIV 688. And there was a whole discussion about subcutaneous versus intradermal and the half-life of the antibodies. And it reminded me of rabies when the woman who wrote in was talking about injecting herself in the belly. And all these different things. So just a couple of things to talk about. So intradermal, if anyone ever had their skin test for tuberculosis, that's where you put the needle just a little under the skin and you raise a little bleb. That's intradermal. That's in the skin. Subcutaneous is sort of down in the fat layer, but above the muscle. So you're not getting it into the muscle. You pull a nice chunk of fat. That's easy to do on me, particularly because I don't go to the gym anymore. But one day it'll be harder, hopefully. The rest of my life is so hard. Why is my belly so soft? But you grab a nice chunk and you put the injection in there. The reason we're studying monoclonal antibodies in the subcutaneous is you don't have to go to a clinic. You don't have to go to a hospital. Anyone can grab a nice chunk and inject in the way they do with Prolia, for instance, some of our other medicines. So we're studying that as well. Why do you do 4 different sites? It's a question of volume at this point. It's just sort of a large volume. What about half-life? The half-life is different with the different antibody preparations. So the Eli Lilly, the BAM, the bamlanivimab, half-life is about 21 days. You get a really high dose. 21 days, it's about half of that. The half-life is a little bit longer with the Regeneron antibodies. And I think I mentioned GSK has made a stock modification, so their antibody has an even longer half-life. So next thing I guess I'll mention is that this is passive immunity. So when you give someone this infusion or you do the subcutaneous injection, then you're not going to see an immune response. You're not going to see lymph nodes. You're not going to see soreness at the site. About 2% of the time, people get a little bit itchy. So that's why we sort of observe them. Get a little bit itchy, we give them Benadryl, hasn't been an issue to date. So making some progress there. The early inflammatory phase. People should go back and listen to Immune 39, a Tonka truck full of salt. And they have a discussion right at about 57 minutes about the cytokine storm. The whole early inflammatory response is really a sophisticated, complicated thing. And it reminded me of a book and a movie based on the same book, Smilla's Sense of Snow. It's written by the Danish author Peter Hoeg. And the main character is a Greenlander. And she presents this idea that a lot of people have heard where the Inuit have multiple words for snow. I think in this book, it's 23. The myth is that there are 50. And I think it's sort of an interesting discussion. When we're talking about this early inflammatory phase and we talk about cytokine storms, really, there's a lot of complexity here. And I think that, you get the immunologist response. It's very complicated. But from a therapeutic point of view, we're still limited in what we do here. We still use steroids during this period. We still do oxygen. We still do medications to prevent people against clots, so a lot of supportive care. Secondary infection phase, we're actually, I think I mentioned last time, but we're starting to see more issues here with resistant organisms because of a sort of overuse of antibiotics early on. So let's really be careful, sort of a reminder there to all our clinicians. If you see these people in the urgent care, you see people in the outpatient setting, what do? You might get them hooked up with a pulse oximeter. You might monitor them. You want to make that decision. Do they need to come in the hospital? You might consider aspirin, things like that. But no antibiotics. This is a viral illness. You want to be really careful. If you're giving more than 10% of your COVID patients antibiotics, you're overdoing it. Most patients can be managed at home without antibiotics. With really not hospitalization in most cases. But if they do need to be in the hospital, if they get to this late phase, this is when we start seeing those infections. The multi-system inflammatory phase, it was like a deja vu back to April today. I don't know if that works right, but anyway. Early on in April, we talked a bit about the Irish patient. I don't know if our listeners who are with us still remember that. And our Irish patient had an episode at one point where things seemed to be going along really well. And I'm thinking, this is great. And we come in and he's completely paralyzed. I don't know if our listeners remember that. Same thing happened over the last 2 days with one of my patients in the ICU. They're getting to the end of week 4. We're starting to talk about, discharge planning, getting this person set up with rehab, and completely paralyzed. And again, this is this Guillain-Barré syndrome that we see as part of this multi-system inflammatory phase. So that individual has been started on IVIG. It's a 5-day treatment that we use, and the motor comes right back. So sort of a frightening thing. But I think now that we understand it, this sort of shows the difference in managing patients. Back when we first saw this in April, we did not know what was going on, what's happening. This person was doing so well. Suddenly they're paralyzed and, they're on a ventilator because they can't breathe on their own. But now we understand where this fits in. Okay, the tail phase, I'm going to finish off here because we've got a few emails and my goal is to keep this all under 30 minutes. And I'm going to suggest that we create some kind of survey to decide what to call this tail phase. Now it's been recognized, is it long COVID? Is it long-haul trucker COVID? Is it long-term COVID? Is it long-lasting COVID? Is it post-COVID? And actually, I'll let our listeners know that, so we're recording this on Thursday, but there is a large multi-hour conference going on today, Thursday, and Friday, where a lot of clinicians, a lot of researchers are all having an NIH-sponsored discussion, trying to better understand not only what's going on here, but how to put together research projects to try to get a better understanding of how to take care of some of these folks. So I'll stop there before we hit emails and just remind everyone that we have finished our Microbe TV fundraiser, which went very well, I'm happy to say. We're going to be able to generously support Microbe TV, which is great. But we're now supporting the Peace Corps' HIV and AIDS programs. Just remember that the other virus is still responsible for a lot of suffering and death throughout the world. So encourage people to go to parasiteswithoutborders.com so we can do our matching support for the months of December and January.
All right. So last time we made a new email address for Daniel at microbe.tv, so you can send the emails there. And I save him the trouble of getting them. Actually, they come to me, but they're still for Daniel, and we have a bunch. So let's do a couple.
All right.
I'm going to lump the first two together. Both Joy and Dennis are worried about long-term COVID. They want to, they say they both have it, and what can be done? Are there any therapeutics in sight? And I've gotten this question many times, Daniel. So what can you tell us?
Yeah, I mean, that was, I think, really encouraging about what is going on today, what's going on tomorrow, is that it is recognized that this is a phenomenon. It is recognized that these people are suffering and that we need to really bring science to bear. This can't be just, try some antihistamine, see if the melatonin helps you sleep. We need to really get these people together. So a couple of things I will say is at United in Research, I've mentioned that website before, we are going to basically create a COVID positive community. And we are going to basically give people a way to go on the web to register as citizen scientists and to basically participate in the different trials and the different approaches to how do we understand what's going on with people who continue to suffer from COVID. And we're going to be following serologies. There'll be questionnaires. There'll be all kinds of biomarker analysis. So there's going to be a lot of individuals looking at this. I will say at this point, we still have sort of primitive where we focus on symptoms, but this is going to be moving hopefully to better therapeutics. But there are thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of individuals suffering with this post-COVID syndrome. And we're committed to finding answers.
All right, next one is from Chaim, who lives in Washington, D.C., and he says, my kid's school is doing almost everything right, distancing, mask wearing, no moving around, no testing, unfortunate. He says there's no testing as in addition to practical issues, they seem to be worried about moral hazard.
Okay.
Anyway, new cases are spiking here in D.C. We are now cresting the record set at the peak in May. Mayor has tightened some restrictions, but indoor dining still permitted, so I think things are going to get worse. His question, is there a point at which we should be pulling our son out of school? Obviously, I don't expect an exact threshold, but conceptually, does it make sense that at some point the background might get high enough to overwhelm the in-school precautions, or are the safety measures enough that we don't have to worry about community spread outside the school?
Yeah, I've always get questions about the schools, and I think that this is important. I'm going to be doing another talk for one of the schools this Sunday, and I think Shane Crotty is going to be going before me, actually. So my buddy Shane Crotty. The science is mounting. The evidence is that you can make schools a safe place. That doesn't mean everyone's making it a safe place, but you can do it. So as you describe, if they put all these proper mitigation measures in place, if they, keep the kids separated, if they wear masks, and watch that they're not indoor dining at school. I really commend my son, who's always horrified that, they sit too close when people eat. And that is true, Barnaby. You should be horrified like I am. We can make schools safe. The interesting thing is not only have I been weighing in and giving advice and sort of commenting on schools in the New York area, but actually throughout the country. My first involvement in schools was actually in March in Texas. And I still remember the conversation. So this was the superintendent of one of the largest school districts in Texas. And, he asked me, and I've known him for a while. So he said, Dan, what do you think? Should we close the schools? And I said, you know what? You can either close them now or you can wait until it's too late. And that was we didn't understand back in March. We didn't know that we could make schools a safe place. So this is a different scenario. And I don't think it's just in New York, you have resources can make the schools safe. I've talked to schools throughout the country. We can make schools safe in Idaho, in Texas, in Montana, in California, in Colorado. And that's one of the things. So I'll go ahead and say, I'm not sure closing schools makes a lot of sense, even here in New York City, where real estate and space is actually quite tough. The New York City mayor wants to open the schools again and wants to do it in a way that they think is safe, because there are clear harms to closing the schools. And the teachers, I'm thinking about teachers here too, they can be made safe if we do what we know works. If we don't give them masks, if we don't put measures in place, if we don't have the distancing, that's a problem. The other thing that is right around the corner, right, the rainbow at the end of this dark tunnel, is right after we do the healthcare workers, we're going to start vaccinating the teachers. So in the coming months, the teachers are going to be safe as well, and I think that's really going to help us with opening schools.
All right, one more from Paul, who is in Manchester, UK. He sends a link to a BBC article about lung damage and wants to hear Dr. Griffin's thoughts. This is an article about a new scanning mechanism that has identified lung damage months after the initial infection. Know anything about this?
I actually appreciate that you bring this up, Paul. If anything, I think people underestimate the damage, the morbidity of COVID-19. Some less than wise people have sort of said, "Oh, COVID, you get it and you either live or you die." Yeah, no. Most people who get COVID don't just live or die. A lot of the people that don't die are really negatively impacted. And we see the people with the long haul, the tail of COVID. But there's also a lot of individuals who were physically active and they find themselves compromised. We've had several serious athletes who find that, they went from running 6-7 miles a day to having trouble going up a flight of stairs. We're appreciating that there can be, for a lot of individuals, much more lung damage than was initially appreciated. We're also recognizing heart damage as well. So I think these studies are really important to let people know that you really want to not get COVID. Because, you may survive. You may come out the other side. You may be able to tell everyone how great you're doing. But let's see you try to run a mile after you've had COVID. It may not go so well. So let's really for the next few months and I guess this reminds me of my other movie, as we'll sort of finish here soon. I watched Greyhound. It always takes me about a week because I watch in like 7-minute increments. But this is a World War II, and it's a shipping convoy, and they've left the safety of air cover of the U.S. and now they're heading towards air cover over in England. And they're how many hours till we're back in air cover, and that's where we are right now. It's only weeks and months till we've got the air cover of the vaccine. So, let's just be safe. Let's zigzag. Let's avoid those crowds. Let's wear those masks. Let's wash our hands so we can get back to the air cover of the vaccine and the pre-COVID world.
All right, that's our COVID-19 clinical update number 39 from Dr. Daniel Griffin. Thank you, Daniel.
Oh, a pleasure as always, and everyone be safe.